You're listening to SBS News.
Hi Commissioner, thank you so much for speaking with SBS World News.
Thank you, it's good to be on air with you.
I wanted to get your view on the politics of climate change here in Australia. You've obviously seen the so-called climate wars over the last decade or so. Are you dismayed by seeing that?
I don't really want to be drawn into the politics of climate in Australia. What I want to focus on is the global agenda within which we hope that Australia will play its part. Yes, of course we understand the politics locally are difficult. It is something Prime Minister Morrison is navigating to be able to come up with a revised NDC and a higher ambition for 2050. So we encourage that. Prime Minister Johnson has spoken to Prime Minister Morrison on several occasions about this, and most recently when they were both in the United States.
So on some of the big events that are coming up now, Scott Morrison as recently as today said he's unsure if he's going to go to Glasgow. He said Jacinda Ardern isn't going. Is that a good enough excuse? Does Scott Morrison need to go in your view?
Each country has to make decisions in their own right. So I'm not the High Commissioner to New Zealand any longer. We would really like to see Prime Minister Morrison at COP in Glasgow in November. Over 100 world leaders have confirmed their participation. This is where we would like to see global collective action and commitment. So of course we would like to see Prime Minister Morrison there amongst that global leadership. If he can't go, then we anticipate senior level representation, but the ask would still be the same, as indeed Prime Minister Johnson has made very clear, most recently at his speech in Unga, that this is the moment for action. The recent IPCC report made it very clear that the current trajectory on emissions will see us get to a point, if we don't see a change within 10 years, where we will not be able to keep within 1.5 degrees of global warming, which will have drastic consequences for the world. This is an economic agenda, and I think, focusing on the economics of this and the importance of economic transition, of getting the investment that we all need on new technology, on transforming our economies, is a vital area of focus, as much as paying greater attention to the natural world and what we need to do to restore the balance.
What would Scott Morrison's absence say to the rest of the world?
I don't think it's for me to say what his absence will mean to the rest of the world, because I don't speak for the rest of the world. What I can say, and indeed Prime Minister Johnson, and indeed in the last 24 hours, the UK President of COP, Alok Sharma, has said, is that, yes, we would be disappointed, but we would understand the reasons for it, and we would hope in Prime Minister Morrison's absence that there will be senior level representation carrying the view of the Australian government and I believe the Australian people, where a recent opinion survey has shown that the majority of Australians would like to see higher ambition.
The federal government is yet to even come up with a plan to commit to net zero by 2050. Does that concern you?
We would like to see progress, obviously, and we know that time is running short. We're 36 days or so out from Glasgow. We have been told that a revised NDC and commitment will be made before Glasgow, so it can be announced at Glasgow. But I also note in the last 24 hours that Prime Minister Morrison's very clear that he wants to explain what the plan is when they arrive at it to the Australian people before he or whoever represents him goes to Glasgow.
Your colleague Alok Sharma is the president of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, says he'd like to see Australia double its 2030 climate ambitions.
Well, he has said that that's what he would like to see, so that is a clear position from him.
Would you agree?
Most people are coming up with a revised interim target of between 40 and 50%. Some have gone further, like my own country. We're going for 68% by 2030 and 78% by 2035. So we would hope to see something in that direction. We've most recently seen New South Wales commit to 50% by 2030. Victoria and South Australia are in a similar position, and I'm sure other states would follow. So much of Australia is already making that commitment.
What would not be acceptable for Australia to take next month?
No movement would not be acceptable. We would find that disappointing. But I know that the Australian government are forecasting that they will exceed the current 26 to 28%. Our encouragement would be that you know what your trajectory is. So whatever that figure is that you know you will exceed by, that's a very good starting point from which to set higher ambition.
Would you like to see that figure closer to the New South Wales benchmark of 50%?
Well, as I've said, the global benchmark is that majority of people are going for somewhere between 40 to 50%. So ideally, that is what we would like to see.
And anything below that?
Well, I'm very clear that anything between 40 to 50 would be in line with the majority of countries and indeed states here and other parts of the world are showing that level of ambition.
Can I ask you on the AUKUS alliance, what do you think this says more broadly about the UK's foreign policy and the shift away from the Anglosphere and looking into the Indo-Pacific?
Well, we've had the phrase global Britain for a number of years. Indeed, Prime Minister Johnson, when he was our foreign minister, our foreign secretary, coined the phrase as he was looking to a Britain in a post-EU membership world. What would that mean for us and how would we project outwards? We published our integrated review earlier this year, which set out where we thought our place in the world should be, is, what our offer to the world is. And of course, whilst we recognise, first and foremost, we are a Euro-Atlantic nation and our commitment to the defence and security of Europe comes first. We also recognise the gravitational pull, the geostrategic economic centre of gravity is shifting to the Indo-Pacific. Now for us, whether it's our economic interests, trade, investment, or it's our security and defence interests, this is the part of the world we have to engage with. And, you know, I think about our presence over the period of my career, which has been entirely in the Indo-Pacific, and in recent years how we've been strengthening our footprint in this part of the world. So AUKUS is an ongoing evolution of that leaning into the Indo-Pacific, recognizing its importance as the region that will drive the global economic and security agenda of this century.
This weekend we've seen a record number of Chinese fighter jets and bombers enter Taiwan's air defence zone. Is the prospect of war or confrontation with China really that unlikely?
Look, no one wants to see an escalation or destabilisation. At the G7, Britain, with other G7 countries, made very clear that we want to see peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits. Recent events don't help peace and stability, and we would encourage all parties across the Taiwan state to return to a position of peace and stability and to avoid escalation.
But does AUKUS, we've seen the announcement of AUKUS has agitated Beijing. Do you worry that it perhaps escalates these tensions a bit further?
I don't think people should worry about AUKUS because they need to look at it in a historical context. Britain has had a century-old relationship with both America in terms of defence and security, with the US and with Australia. For both Australia and the UK, the United States is our first security and defence partner. This is a natural progression of that long-standing partnership. It's a development of it, and we are all looking at the new technologies that we need in terms of our capacity and capability, whether it is AI or quantum computing. And the people that you are probably most comfortable, because there is trust at the heart of the relationship, a deep understanding and affinity, are our closest allies and friends. So it shouldn't be a surprise that Britain, Australia, and the United States seek to develop those new capabilities together. But this is not an exclusive relationship. We're part of the Five Eyes. We have other like-minded partners in countries that we work with. And I'm sure in time, as we all look to develop these capabilities, there will be opportunities to work with others too.
You mentioned our allies. Another big player here, France, they are furious about this decision. Boris Johnson in Washington told President Macron, "Donnez-moi un break." Has the dust settled here?
The dust is settling. It will take time because we realise that feathers have been ruffled. And what we all need to keep a clear eye on is the bigger picture. Close friends and allies sometimes upset each other, but we have to overcome those moments to look at the bigger security and defence agenda, and to remember where our friendships are and the depth of those friendships. We have the Entente Cordiale, the Lancaster House treaties that define our relationship with France. Everything in that still stands. You will have seen President Biden has spoken to President Macron. Indeed, last week or the week before, Prime Minister Johnson also spoke to President Macron. We are very clear, both the US and the UK, about our ongoing commitment to NATO, the security and defence of Europe. We do not resile from that position. And actually, between the US and the UK, we are the largest contributors to Europe's defence and security. There is absolute commitment to that, and people should have absolute trust in us in that.
Have you been in touch with the French ambassador to Australia here in recent weeks?
Well, he's back in France, so I've not spoken to him. I did send him a message at the time, and as soon as he returns to Australia, whenever that is, I will look forward to re-engaging with him and working with him on important global agenda issues like climate change. French colleagues amongst those I've worked most closely with across all the missions that I have headed in recent years.
But you haven't heard back from him since you last?
I haven't, because I appreciate and understand that, he's busy in Paris being briefed and working with his government on how to re-engage with the relationship here.
Are you sympathetic to the view that's been put forward by France as well, that this may undermine the EU?
Well, it shouldn't do. We're no longer a member of the EU, so it's not for me to comment on internal EU issues. All I can reinforce is that although we have left the European Union, we remain European, we remain committed to the security, defence and the economic growth of Europe. It is a huge and important market for Britain, 450 million people on our doorstep. The first free trade agreement that we negotiated were the new terms of our trading relationship with the EU. So the EU matters hugely to us economically, apart from anything else.
On trade relations with Australia, trade talks with the UK currently underway. How close are we to finalising this deal?
We're very close. We're in the sort of final stage. We are closing a number of chapters. There are still one or two points where we have to reach agreement, but I'm sure that isn't too far off.
The UK has obviously been urging Australia to set more ambitious emission reduction targets, but at the same time we saw recently reports that UK officials struck out any reference to Australia's Paris targets. Is that a bit hypocritical, do you think?
Well, you shouldn't believe everything you read. And I can be very clear too to your audience that there will be provision in our free trade agreement on climate change and our commitment to Paris.
So references to Australia's obligations under the Paris Accord will be...
Yes, because that is a statement of commitment. Your own government is very clear on delivering on the Paris Agreement, as are we. So it's not a difficult thing to include language on our respective commitments to Paris in our FTA.
Just lastly, I wanted to ask you about the Ashes. Prime Minister Johnson and Morrison discussed that in Washington. From what you know, are the Ashes going ahead?
We all want the Ashes to go ahead. Naturally, I think for the England cricket team, they want assurances on family being able to join them and quarantine requirements. And as all Australians know at the moment, the ability to move between states is a little bit challenging with COVID restrictions. But I do know that over the weekend, Cricket Australia set out for England cricket what they thought the arrangements should be, could be, and that they're working to deliver. And the English cricket team will now consider them and respond. But, you know, we would like to see the Ashes progress. We think our connections through sport are very important, our people-to-people links, and it is something both the Prime Ministers are taking some interest in.
Would you like to see a bubble for players, potentially even supporters, between Australia and the UK?
I think what we need is a COVID-safe approach, and the great tradition of our players coming with their families, spending months here, which is what the whole tour normally entails, is something very special. But at a time of COVID, we need to manage that with care. So, you know, whether it is a bubble or not, that's for the Australian authorities to determine how this can proceed in an appropriate way, where not just the players of both teams, but any of the audience who come to watch the matches, that all of that is COVID compliant.
High Commissioner, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.